Hello, welcome back to the Double Swing. A much faster turnaround than you're probably used to. I think it's going to be 2 episodes in the same week, which is the first time that's maybe ever happened. Except for maybe the exception of an RMR event here or there. But that means there's nothing really to recap. The Blast Showdown is still ongoing, and as much as I wish I could already be roasting Yumi for his picks, I actually can't. So let's just get straight into this one by introducing our guest, Allan. Thank you very much for joining us. Obviously, those of you who will recognize Allan from Desks, from other podcasts, and of course, from your time with Endpoint. So thank you for joining the show. How are you doing?
Just reminiscing on my Endpoint times. They were the best days, brother. So it's a mystery why I haven't gone back to coaching since, I guess. Maybe I will after thinking about it now. But yeah, long and storied and degrading career. It's great.
Okay. Well, on that cheery note, why don't you get started with your first pick?
Welcome to Britain. This is what we like.
Dacha Belgrade Season 2. Optimism flying high straight away.
Exactly. Right. Should we get into it?
Yeah, take us away. Your first favourite of this event. Shock us.
Well, I will shock you because the reason I picked this team, guys, is because I was the third person to pick my favourite. And maybe the better options went away. So I've gone for Virtus Pro. Virtus Pro. The confusing thing about Virtus Pro is they should be better, shouldn't they? Virtus Pro should be a better team. If you look at the team they had last year and you said, oh, we're just going to insert electronic, we're cooking. We're absolutely cooking with gas. We've got a team that no doubt should be competing for top fours at big events, the odd titles when they have the right run, but it hasn't necessarily transpired. Of course, had a couple good events in the middle of last season, right towards the end. They looked better as well. But form hasn't necessarily been maintained. But yeah, I think Virtus Pro absolutely have the ceiling to win an event like this. I mean, their lineup, if you look at the pieces on paper, they've got such strong parts. James, in my eyes, is still a top in-game leader. He calls a great game. Electronic as an individual or as a secondary caller, a secondary voice is phenomenal. Fame and Flit, again, good players. So I look at the lineup on paper and I say, this team absolutely could win this event. There's so many good ways to look at it, but why haven't they been playing so well? Why hasn't the lineup transpired? Is it similar to the Cloud9 team of last year, where you look at the team on paper and like, this is amazing? It's a team of Electronic as well, and it doesn't pan out. And again, you watch Virtus Pro and you're like, Fame and Flip were like some of the best riflers in the world at the end of 2022 going into 2023, and neither of them look like that player at the moment. Maybe Flip more so at times, but certainly not Fame. I'm not sure if that's a role thing with Electronic coming in, but again, we've got so many good pieces here. Surely it's going to work at some point, and I'm saying it's going to work at the BetBoom Dacha in Belgrade.
See, I feel like you're smoking the same thing I've been smoking, because you may not watch many of our shows, Allan, but I am a serial Virtus Pro picker, and
yes,
almost every time they have failed me in that pick.
Almost.
Well, yeah, every time actually. I think it is every time. Yeah, I even picked them for the showdown, and they have won their opening game, and it was against Zero Tenacity, where Fame actually had a good performance. But I think the weird thing is this team does have star level players that just don't hit star numbers basically ever. Like occasionally you'll get good games from Flit. Very, very occasionally you'll get good games from Fame. And really, I feel like driving forces on the team are James and Norbert, which is a shame because I thought Electronic would actually help. I thought Electronic would actually be like a third driving force for the team, and that, you maybe didn't have to hope that Flip was on his game or Fame was on his game when you actually saw these series play out. But it is a shame because I do think they set themselves up in a lot of good ways, but the team just kind of falls short so frequently.
Isn't it mad as well that, you look at the team on paper and you're like, if you look at this team a year ago, you're saying if they're having problems, you'd be like, oh, it's because Norbert is still this fifth player that can't fit in these roles. He's being hamstrung in. But we know from the end of last year that Norbert was playing probably the best Counter-Strike of his life at the start of CS2. He looked good in the roles. And I fail to believe, even if he's had a drop-off, that he's some massive liability and he's the reason this team isn't performing quite at the level we expect. So again, it's another point of confusion where it's like, even the quote-unquote worst player on this team surely is on par with other role players in the similar positions in other top teams. So then you look at the rest of the team, and you're just like, how isn't this working? How isn't this working? And I think you touched on it, Michael, that it's probably Flit and Fame, isn't it? Where they looked so good last year. Where have they gone?
I think as well, like, when you think about the impact that Fame usually has on games, I can very frequently remember, like, oh, when Norbert gets good entries and Flit is set up and has, like, you know, takes control of a bomb site. There are so many games where you kind of forget Fame exists sometimes because he is often neglected and not set up for a lot of success. And I thought he would really grow into, like, his extremities lurking or, you know, trying to take space on counter reactions. And he does do that sometimes, but I feel like he never actually takes the risk until we're in a 3v3 and the initial plan is blown up. Like, he actually doesn't ever go for a timing himself. Like, I don't think he has his own playbook. And so I feel like he's often just roped along by James saying, like, yeah, play those spots. I'll give you room. I'll let you make a play eventually. And that just never happens. And I actually feel like that's part of the reason why sometimes Fame just doesn't even have, like, these star pop-offs. But I do have suspicions that they are trying to restructure, given how consistently Flit has actually underperformed in his sort of being teed up for success that they've tried for the past few months.
Yeah, but if you notice, literally over the last 6 to 8 months, Fame has sort of regressed to the very hack-dominant, always trading, always being traded sort of role that he seemed to have, you know, coming out of K23 as a young guy. It has been a very, like, negative change, I think, for him since Electronics come through. And I've just not been a fan of watching it anymore. I mean, he was one of my favorite players to follow. As Virtus Pro come up, they've taken one of my prospects up with them, and he's just developed into a player who's not a superstar, but he's a consistent piece who delivers impact. Now, he's just another rifler who's kind of, you know, mediocre, boring, flat. And those are not the words I really associated with him coming into them. He was always very explosive. But now, something's gone wrong. And it's easy to point the finger at Electronic. You know, comes into Cloud9, falls apart, comes into this team, seems to be falling apart as well. I also thought this was going to be a flat, just slam dunk. No need to really talk about it. No need to argue about it. This was supposed to be a super team. I think you've taken a very bold risk taking on Virtus Pro as a pick. We call them Yumi's abusive ex for a reason. He can't keep going back, but finally he's offloaded them onto someone else, which I think will be an interesting result to deal with.
Is Electronic the new Mir? You know,
that is that's a low blow.
A man that goes into teams for them only to die.
I don't know.
I mean, at least Mir used to get his numbers back in the day, though.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I somewhat still have confidence in this team, even if it's not this 5. Remember, they got rid of Dazdan, didn't they? And they changed to is Ed Zoma? I guess it's Ed Zoma, the coach now. That's clearly an indictment that they're not happy with the direction the team is going in. Dazdan never struck me as someone who was, let's say, super pushy with playing his style of Counter-Strike. He seemed more like a wingman to James. I wonder if Zoma is more of an aggressive voice in terms of how the team is shaped. So potentially that they're in a rebuilding phase. I'm not sure, but absolutely, if I was some of the players on this team, and maybe even at an event like BetBoom Dacha, if we're not making top 4, maybe even further contesting for the finals if they have a good route, I'd be looking at my teammates saying, "What the heck is going on? Like, we need to be winning an event like this. We've got the players."
Yeah, definitely. This should be their kind of event. And well, thinking of Zoma, just now that you've like activated a memory hit, when he moves over to this roster, 9Pandas also cut their IGL. Like, he comes from 9Pandas, they cut. Maybe he is just that kind of guy who is very direct, very forceful with what he wants the team to do, and that's their idea going forward. Implement his ideas. Let's move on to my next pick, because we could, I think, talk all day about Virtus Pro and their various failings and potential and undelivered promises. I'm going to pick my favorite. I was so happy to have this fall to me. I'm going to take MOUZ Sports, probably, given the way Spirit played their last event, the heavy favorite going into this event. Man, they're a team who've struggled recently, just on big stages more than anything else, to really make a name for themselves, but they've never struggled in slightly lower tier cups. Like exactly this one, which they have won in the past. I think literally season 1, they took the crown home. So I'm very happy with this one. Jimfat is a player who has come, I want to say he's come a long way, but most of what he's done is just maintain his composure and translate the same game he's been playing for somehow 2 years into tier 1. He was this ultra composed, high value lurker and anchor down as far as the Finnish like tier 2 teams he played in. He always played the exact same way. Not a damn thing has changed, and he's now delivering it on the biggest stages. This isn't even that. He'll be the MVP of this event. Mark my words, that's just a prediction to throw out there. Torji is still dynamic and highly influential on their CT sides mostly, and Xerxian is up there with the best aggressive riflers. This team has looked pretty close to perfect, aside from that game against Na'Vi where they lose 2 close maps of outstanding CS. I'm a big believer in this roster. I think they go all the way here. This has to be their event to win.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really knock the MOUZ pick. They are very good in a closed studio with no crowd.
You can call it boring, isn't that what you did last week?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it is boring. It is a bit boring. But I think it's actually in a weird time where, because you kind of mentioned the fact that Spirit, because of the way that they played at Cologne, it is like a simpler pick based on that. But then also, I think there's actually a very good possibility that Spirit come in completely locked in for the event. So it's a very it's a weird tenuous time where you actually just don't know how these teams are going to perform at one event. Like towards the end of last season, MOUZ looked a little bit of a shell of themselves. Coming into Cologne, they look a little bit more reinvigorated now that the season started back up again. And you know, I usually levy a lot of criticisms over to Torji on this team, where I think he is, probably the most replaceable piece on this roster, like in terms of upgrading. But he actually does have his games where he just makes a lot of really good decisions, and I think that's been happening more and more frequently. And I think Cologne actually had quite a few games where I was actually kind of impressed that Torji was making these plays to sort of open up rounds or secure them. So yeah, I don't even think a lot of the emphasis for me is on Jimfat, because when you get further into competition, I expect Jimfat to actually still put up those numbers. It's actually a lot to do with how much Shue actually gets, individual fragging, or how much of the calling kind of accelerates given the stage. Because sometimes I feel like MOUZ are lacking a bit of punch when you get further and further into tournaments. But this environment, yeah, I struggled to see those problems cropping up for this team.
I guess the kind of the way to frame MOUZ is that they've obviously had their best, let's say the end of last year into this year is the best CS they've ever played as a probably ever as an org, but certainly in terms of the core of this team. Playing their best Counter-Strike. Didn't have the best time at the previous major, so looking ahead to Shanghai, for them, it's about building into that, isn't it? It's and the question in my mind is, are MOUZ really going to be a contender to win a major? Because I don't know, I can't even explain exactly what it is, but something about MOUZ just doesn't excite me in the way that the other elite teams does. Something about this team doesn't shout out at me saying that this is going to be a world-beating team. They've obviously had a tremendous world ranking. They've had plenty of results now to essentially prove me wrong, but I still look at this team and I still question what we can say Jimfat is a great player, or Xerxian's playing well, or Shui's good cooler, but there's a spectrum here. There's levels we need to jump through, and to say someone's very good, yeah, that'll make you a top 10 team. They might even make you a top 5 team, but in terms of being one of the best teams in the world, I'm not sure anybody on this team is of that caliber. And I've got to be honest. Now, I kind of hope they prove me wrong. And the point I'm trying to make is that if you're MOUZ and you're going to contend for this major, you need to clean up an event like this. You can't mess around. You need to go in there and push these teams shitting and win it, and prove that Jimfat is an elite level player, and he can top the scoreboard throughout any game and win in the biggest moments. You need to prove that Shui can call a good game and call from deficits and beat a team like Spirit in a grand final. Brolan as well. Brolan probably is actually my favorite player on this team, because I mean, he got so hard done by those later Fnatic lineups, and he never played his best CS. He is a truly incredible player. And seeing his resurgence. So for me, that is MOUZ at the moment, is proving legitimacy and then ramping up towards the major. And to do that, they need to win this event.
Well, on past experience, just this exact event, they dropped one map last time to Virtus Pro in overtime. As far as Jimfat's performance, I mean, honestly, I think he's gotten a lot better since then, especially in the playoff games. But back at that event, I think he didn't have a single map really where he looked weak. Like, I just ran through the numbers. Everything was fine statistically. I don't go entirely by that, and I can't pretend I remember every map I watched. So everything's lining up so far. And I'm going to be very excited about it. But I think their biggest contender, obviously, Yumi, you've taken in your favorite pick. Like, this is the big one, and it's a weird one, just based on what we've seen from Cologne.
Oh, it's coming at a weird time, given that there seemed to be a lot of chatter around this team, given how much they underperformed at Cologne. Yeah, I have picked Spirit, but there was also a lot of talk behind the scenes about, oh, are they making roster moves? Oh, maybe the reason they underperformed or this player did poorly is because he knew he was getting dropped before the event actually happened. You know, there's all these rumors circulating by I think people that are relatively credible, but also there's more that spark up from less credible sources and the sort about whether or not Perfecto joins this team and what that sort of means for Spirit. But I think people also are so quick to jump on it because of how poorly they did at Cologne. And I think they very quickly forget just how lethal this team actually can be. Like, from Chopper and how aggressive he can be, and the speed at which he sort of ramps up his calling, Donk and his aggressive plays alongside players like Zontix. Shiro is just like a great round closer alongside Magix, weirdly, who I've never really been sold on Magix on his position on this team. I think they probably could get somebody weirdly like Hobbit or like a Perfecto type that could maybe even fill his roles. But he captures the vibe, and he's like an older brother, I think, to Donk or something. So whatever, we'll keep it for the chemistry. Yeah, Spirit are still an elite level team, and I think that's really the discrepancy that they have versus a MOUZ. You know, you make that comparison, Allan, of, you know, good players. Sure, that's fine. You can get to top 10. But in terms of elite caliber players, you have Shiro and you have Donk that have actually proven that at some of the biggest events we have in Counter-Strike. Whereas MOUZ have yet to really, I guess, pass that hurdle so that those players can be categorized in the same way.
Yeah, those are certainly the final barriers remaining, is to capture for MOUZ an elite event in the same way Spirit did this year. I mean, Donk's insane Katowice run, which he's yet to replicate in exactly the same way, same style. Not that you'd really expect someone to do that. That was historic and seismic, really. But I was just worried by the way they played in Cologne, because it's like they didn't entirely believe in the way they have played. Like, they seemed shy, they seemed slow, they seemed unsure. I mean, that nuke game still haunts me, that nuke game against G2. Because they just never seemed like they thought, we have the best rifle on the server, let's go set him up to go take a bunch of fights and just brute force us some rounds. I mean, the most aggressive play they set up was for Zontix out of door on the T side. Like, what on earth is that as a game plan for Spirit on nuke? That worried the hell out of me. A lot of people have pointed at that dejected Zontix interview, and of course, all of a sudden, everyone's an armchair psychologist, just sat there yep, actually, when you listen to the way he speaks, the intonation on that word indicates that he actually thinks he's going to get benched. Come on, guys. He's a kid who just lost a game. He's still, 19? Come on. Let's not read too deeply into this. He probably just lost a game and felt a bit shit. So, they're still going to be dangerous. But last time they came into this event, they lost 3-0 in the final anyway. And so, you know, I'm sure they'll stomp. They're going to have, compared to their usual competition, an absolute cakewalk, getting out of the groups and going down into the... Oh, this is not a group stage. Oh, wow. I've only just noticed it's not a group stage. Oh, this is going to be chaos. This is going to be very interesting, because they might have to face MOUZ twice with this upper-lower bracket.
Yeah, it's like a double limb bracket, yeah.
I did not realize that. I was still going off the old format. Okay. Wow, this is going to be a bloodbath. I'm all of a sudden way more interested in this event. Now that I know it's going to be a massive double elim with these two teams involved. Okay, this is going to be sick.
It should also mean multiple matchups with Virtus Pro, Spirit, and MOUZ.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
And then some of the top teams from the play-ins too. Yeah, okay. Spirit is intriguing. First question you have to pose is Spirit. Obviously, the way they started this year was unbelievable. Especially Kato with how Donk played. You have to immediately throw the question of what does Spirit look like when Donk? Not even. I mean, he can still be one of the best players in the world, but there's still even the gap between a world-class player, the way he played it, like Kato, for example, is still like, you can fit entire players in that chasm. Like you can just have an extra player on the server, and it wouldn't be as good as Donk was there. So you certainly have to pose the question of Spirit. Is I'm not even saying Donk is a bad day. I'm saying if Donk plays to the level of the other top 5 players or top 10 players in the world, what does Spirit look like? And probably a fair assessment to say, not quite the same utterly savage victories they had at an event like Kato since then. More hard fought, losing in some events, of course, still can win them. I mean, they have absolutely tremendous firepower in Shiro and Donk, but you know, when you can't rely on Donk, and Donk's playstyle as well is ridiculously impact heavy. The entries he gets is like they're worth like 2 kills. If you get a clean entry and it doesn't get traded, probably something like somewhere between 70 and 75% chance of winning that round on T, maybe even more. So every time he gets that, you know, he basically won the round already. So you certainly have to pose that angle with Spirit. And then obviously, if you say if you accept the position that Shiro and Donk are two of maybe the top 10 players in the world, does that mean they're strategically a bit weaker than some of the other top teams? Are they strategically weaker than MOUZ? I mean, if you compare the lineups, maybe MOUZ has. MOUZ doesn't have the same peak, but maybe some of their lesser players are of a higher caliber. But I certainly think if you accept the position that Spirit has these incredible players, and they must have some issues, maybe in communication, some areas to work on, like the protocols or there's the strategic side, especially with all of Valve's recent changes to nades and stuff. So yeah, I mean, for Spirit, that's how I look at them. Is they need to. You can't live off Donk's level of form forever. You need to build off a bedrock, and they certainly can play excellent Counter-Strike and call really good games, but consistency is king, and they still have some young players, and that takes time to learn. It's not a given that when they're winning an event like Kato, they've learned all that stuff already. It's more so that Donk has propelled them to that position, and now they need to maintain that. So it'd be very interesting to see an event like this, because Spirit themselves should absolutely feel like they can win it. They might even feel like they should win it. Certainly Donk and Shiro would. So it'd be very interesting to see how they've developed as a team beyond just those star power individuals. Obviously take a lot of the limelight, but there's a lot more things that go into winning a CS game than just fragging power.
Yeah, I think I made I sort of planted the idea of Spirit coming into the season where they are seen as one of the elite teams in the world, and this is like the first time they've ever had to experience that. After they started the last season with the crazy Katowice, and then finals of BetBoom, and then closing the season with last spring finals. For them, they probably feel as though they were the major threats, and then they come to the Cologne and play probably the worst Counter-Strike we've seen them play all year. And it is, I think, probably a big mentality hurdle that they have to surpass in terms of how much preparation they come into these events with, and how much they have to maybe even think about, like you said, like what do they look like when Donk doesn't actually have one of those big games, because there were a couple events before Blast Spring Finals where that was, he wasn't popping off quite as hard as people were kind of hoping he would be as the number 1 or number 2 player in the world. And I think that's weirdly similar to what the Mongols had to go through. Like they're the top team in Asia, but I think they've had to do some restructuring about like how they set up for openers and who's doing what. And there's been a couple of role swaps. I just don't know that Spirit need to do that if that is the approach that they came into Cologne with. So That's maybe my main concern, is that they're trying to fix what isn't really broken. They just have to like find other ways of, I guess, enabling those sort of lesser pieces to get output with Donkers having trouble.
You know what's strange is I thought they'd kind of addressed this come the end of the season with the way they won the Blast Spring Finals. Like, it wasn't a crazy donk. They used him. They got great performance out of Shiro. They were able to outcall Vitality, like, just straight up, which was not something we were really expecting at that point. I mean, Chopper had already come under a little bit of criticism, a little bit of fire for maybe not being the best IGL in the field for the elite teams. So it's felt like they had started addressing concerns. The way they came out of the off-season is a really worrying sign. Like, maybe they just doubt themselves, overthinking it.
Maybe.
I mean, you always have to draw a through line between, it's very, and I've done this on desks before in the sense of like overrating one series or one event and saying, as an example, I remember for Rio, this is the Rio Major, prepping Cloud9 when Nafany was still cooling. Obviously, Maui had his fun around that sort of time with Nafany. And I remember watching, I think they're playing FaZe on Ancient. And I watched this game and I just sat through it and I was like, this is some of the best cooling I've ever seen. The way Nafany varied their T side and made good decisions and always seemed to be picking the right bomb site. And obviously, when you're prepping for an event, I can't sit through 50 demos a team. So I have to extrapolate. And I have to say, based on what I've seen here, I need to draw some conclusions. The conclusion I came to was that at least in terms of their ceiling, Cloud9 could call really good Counter-Strike. They can make great decisions. Maybe they're not super consistent. And then, you know, you see them at that event. I see them in events, the events they played after that. And it was like, no, that might have been their ceiling, but it was definitely not the norm. That team had problems.
Cool.
And they weren't playing the best CS. So Spirit's not quite an extreme case, I guess, but with all teams, you have to draw that through line. And you have to say, what if we're going to play a bog standard 16 teams top LAN event, what sort of performance are you going to have? And as I think Yumi's alluded to as well, is you can't actually pin where Spirit's going to land, can you? Spirit could win an event, or maybe Cologne is extreme, but they could definitely lose in a round of 8 to an RV, to a G2, to even someone like a Virtus Pro if they're playing good Counter-Strike. So I think Spirit are a little bit intrinsically inconsistent. Maybe that's because they lean a lot on the players. Maybe that's because, I mean, my suspicion for a team like this is, as good as the CS they've played, they still have plenty of areas to grow in the events they win. And maybe they won these events in different ways, but you can point to very specific things and saying, this is amazing about this team. But if you actually look at, if it was like a game of top trumps, it's not a given that all of their stats, all of their angles of this team are maxing out. And I think they have to learn that. And I think any team with their age and they've only been like a year since they promoted those academy guys. That's not long enough when you're going up against the likes of some of Vitality and G2's players and FaZe to win consistently. So I think they're still growing as a team. I certainly wouldn't make a roster move. I mean, no, not at least until post major, because they could win it and they have that ceiling.
Yeah, there's still a chance. No point overreacting just yet. Before we move on to underdogs, I think there's one more technically a favorite team, a team that's already in the main event with a direct invite. Just going to briefly touch on them. Heroic. They've had a really rough time of things of late. In between just getting their players into countries, and then once they are playing with that player, actually winning games. It's been an awful combination for them. They've just not been able to do either one. Losing to OG most recently in the Blast Premier Fall Showdown. We got any takes as to what's going wrong with this roster? Do they just need more reps with Dexter, or is this just bound to fail?
I don't know if you want to talk about this first, Allan, because...
Aren't they just a team where you look at the pieces, you're like, this isn't that good? I mean...
Sure, but
relative to some of their previous lineups, I think someone like Kixan obviously had massive breakout events, like he did at the major with Apex last year. And again, as I kind of referenced, it's a fallacy to point at just one event and say this is them. Kixan is still relatively inexperienced versus some of the players he's up against. And he doesn't have the depth of players like a Shuey has, nor does he have necessarily the coaching staff around him that someone like Shuey does. So I think it's not a given that Kixan's going to... What you can't do with this team is say, Nertz is going to play his best Counter-Strike. Kixan will call like he did at that major. Dexter is like this almost like anime supervillain at this point of just like, we know he's ridiculously skilled. His ceiling is enormous. When's he going to prove it? Even Tezzers and Shush in their roles have played great in the past. It's certainly possible to look at this team and say, well, why don't they all just play their best? But when you actually sit down and look at it, you're like, I'm not sure this makes a great deal of sense. The lineup I'm being presented. I'm not sure who's the leader of this team. I know Kixan's the in-game leader, but who's the most vocal pieces? Who fronts this team? Who makes the big sweeping decisions? How is Nertz used? Is Dexter making it to the LAN? There's a lot of questions with this team, and it doesn't. At least the bizarre thing is the kind of contrast with previous heroic lineups, the fully Danish teams, is they win off being similar lineups for a long time, all buying into Cadian's system, have a very very defined brand of Counter-Strike they're playing, and that means they have a high floor. This heroic doesn't have that, and by going international and bringing all these pieces together, there's a lot of things you got to make work. And if a team like Falcons can't make it work, why should heroic? Because they don't have the same caliber of pieces.
Yeah, it's like they just don't have like the same teamwork interplay like Tessus and Shush are kind of known for from that old heroic. I actually do think, if you're thinking about like the players and the roles they occupy, heroic have like 3 very, very good pieces. Like I think Tessus, Shush, Nertz are all fantastic additions or like a fantastic core to work off of. But this is also Kixan's first proper project for himself. Like often Kixan was going into teams and seeing if he could, add a bit of spice or change up the calling style slightly or be better in mid rounds, I guess, than previous in-game leaders. This was basically, I have a new project, I have to make this work, and it's his first proper go at it. And to be honest, I don't know, seeing him whip out a Negev versus OG, when they're already losing, and to be fair, they did bring it back, after those rounds. So I can't really knock it too heavily, but seeing stuff like that, I do just worry that there's like this disconnect of, I guess we're just losing another one of these games. It may, whatever, do whatever you want, guys. And I have that fear with, I guess, more now that Dexter's in the team, weirdly, because I do have a feeling that Dexter can kind of check out if he has poor starts. The guy's very explosive, but can be just as incendiary.
I'll give Heroic a pass in one sense, is that these international teams are really hard to make work. And it's so rare that the initial formulation of these teams works. You look at all of the top international teams, with the exception perhaps of the current Na'Vi, they've all had to make massive changes, or the core has survived and we're swapping players out. So I would have thought from a heroic management perspective, it might be the case that you retain Shush and Tezes and you bring in these, I mean, it was originally Nico Dos, but now it's Dexter, obviously. You bring in these players and you're like, which of these are going to work? And some of them will. I mean, obviously, I have tremendous confidence in someone like Nertz. I also think Dexter, I really believe Dexter could be one of the best players in the world, given what I've seen of him over his career. So I certainly think there's a world where Heroic build towards that. I don't think it's this lineup, but if I was in the management of this team, I'd be listening to the comms. I'd be seeing the way the players are interacting. I'd obviously be watching the games, and I'd be really thinking which of these pieces are going to be here for 2 or 3 years. And that for me is what they need to answer, and then probably make some more changes. So unfortunately for this sort of event, I don't have the highest hopes, but maybe this can be. I mean, especially the format. I think we're playing a lot of best of threes, so maybe some of the pieces can start to make sense. Because at the moment, it all looks like a bit of a jumbled mess to me.
They re-signed Tessus and Shush, didn't they, recently?
Yep.
Yeah. Both 2-year
Yeah,
contract extensions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just keep it to their Danish roots. That's it. I imagine. Like, good solid pieces as well.
The thing is, players have a lot of leverage as well, though. That I don't think any players would sign. I mean, I'm not an agent, but I would never let players sign excluding circumstances where they wanted mobility. I would never let them sign an under 2-year contract. So I think Heroic are probably a bit hamstrung, where it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to make a change now when there's nobody on the market because we just had all the changes. So I think it's a tricky one. It's also, as you've seen them over the years with many teams, like, how hard's that contract going to stand when there actually needs to be a change? Bit debatable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And certainly, if anybody else wants those players, it was commonly the case with players that if they want to continue playing, they might sacrifice what would be their salary if they stayed on the bench to go over and stuff like this, or reduced break clause number or whatever. So it's not a given that they'd be stuck there in time, but yeah. If I imagine Heroic didn't have a lot of choice, and they couldn't just find new players willy-nilly.
Yeah, just because you re-sign a player doesn't mean that they will stay on the active roster. Zipex, we think of you sometimes.
Is he not still with Astralis? What's he doing
Probably
now?
somehow.
Isn't he coaching?
Right?
Isn't he coaching? Am I remembering wrong?
I
The
think
academy team.
Analyst. Yeah, he's like he's assistant coach
He's
for
at
MOUZ.
Yeah, MOUZ. Yeah. Just saw him in that jersey. That's weird. Oh.
This is the arc we needed.
Yeah,
I need Zitnik to come out on stage as MOUZ beats Spirit.
They did have him play for Astralis Talent for a bit, and they were like, actually, you know what? Nah, actually, you just benched. And then he moved to assistant coach. So
yeah, it wasn't even good enough for the academy. Though to be fair, based on some of the players Astralis Talent has cut, no one is, so that's not much of a standard. But no, Heroic, obvious reasons I think why none of us have taken them. We've only got one favourite pick. No point taking a risk on them right now. The stock is an all-time low and it doesn't seem to be recovering anytime soon. With that concluded, let's talk about these underdogs then. We've got 2 of them each, and these are quite interesting, I think, because if you look at them just on the rankings, they are fairly like squished together, fairly compressed. Not much separating them there. We've had to split hairs though. Allan, who have you taken?
Well, the best thing about mine is that as I was sat here thinking about it, I was like, maybe they actually stand a better chance of winning than Virtus Pro. I was actually thinking through this. My underdog pick, which might also be becoming my favorite pick, is Eternal Fire. I actually really like this team, which will be for people that have actually followed me from over the years. That might be a surprise because I have a tendency to lean towards the teams that play good rulebook Counter-Strike and make consistently good decisions and, rely on the team rather than individuals more so. But that's not really Eternal Fire. This is like my guilty pleasure team. They have a really high ceiling. Does this team? I think there are worlds where they could have won big lands last season. Obviously they had a good online performance at CCT, for example. If that was a LAN, they might have still won it. And I just really like the makeup of this team. It's an absolute pleasure to watch them compared with previous, even the Space Soldiers teams of old, because the roles are just so much better. Wicadia is like an absolute profit level godsend for this team. That he came out of nowhere. He resolves all personnel problems and he resolves role problems. He comes in, everyone's like, yeah, Major, you're the best in-game leader now. Now they've got Wicadia playing. It's so hunky-dory that it's almost an unbelievable storyline of how they've made this team work again. But yeah, I mean, this team excites me a lot. I really, truly believe they have a quantifiable chance of winning this tournament. I think they have, going to any tournament, they can definitely have good results, but there aren't that many top teams here if they get a favorable bracket. I certainly think there's many worlds where they play spoiler to one of MOUZ or Spirit or especially Virtus Pro. Yeah, I mean, we can dig more into the analysis in a minute, but I really, really think they could win this. Maybe not more than like a 15-20% chance, but they always have that in them because their ceiling is utterly so high.
High ceiling, I think low emotional floor. I feel like this team, when they get in a rut, are really get really in their feelings. Like, they struggle, I think, to bounce back in games where other teams would, objectively create a nice scenario or, have practiced something ahead of time. I do agree these guys aren't like the most structured team in the world, and they've got great players. I just think what will hold them back from actually winning events is actually that ability to think critically and objectively in those types of scenarios and actually have fallback plans, where I think a lot of it just kind of ride or dies on Xantares. And I know he's reliable. He has certainly been reliable for this team. But man, if he ever gets a weird and wonky start, then suddenly Woxic struggling as well, and Wicadia for me isn't enough of a bailout. I can accept this team as a guilty pleasure team, but I would not put them in the actually challenging to win the event category for me.
If our standard for one of the actual teams to challenge would be one of the 4 best, they've got a sneaky chance. Just, because Heroic are on the down, they've got such an explosive high end, maybe. And especially if you give them AKs and tell them to hold W, they are really, really scary. That's when Wicadia looks at his best, looks literally like a tier 1 talent. When he's on the defensive end, yeah, maybe not. I've always lamented that Xantares has been stuck in this roster for years now. He's far, far better than this roster really deserves. He has the talent to be the best player in the world at times, and yet he's playing play-ins and tier 2 cups at best. He's not ever had that opportunity to really rise up above it. Now, sure, they could have an upset run here. I think you're right. They could upset Virtus Pro. Go for it.
If Eternal Fire was a Blast and ESL partner team, where would their world ranking be?
9, 10?
Because
they play more events, they'd lose a lot of these games.
You can pose the questions of why don't Eternal Fire have better results. They don't have... If Eternal Fire had heroic spots, I guarantee you they play better CS than heroic. At least they produce the few better... Their average results would be better than heroic. I'm quite convinced.
And this current heroic, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
That's probably fair. Yeah.
I think Eternal Fire's... It's also bizarre to me that they don't play more Counter-Strike. They actually don't play that many tournaments, which, especially for those of us that have been around a long time, the idea of a team with Major and Xantares and Calyx not playing every event imaginable is actually bizarre.
It is puzzling.
So that does confuse me about this team, but I do think it's especially world ranking wise, it might be a bit of a fallacy just to look at their ranking because they don't have those partner slots.
Yeah, that's dictated a lot of how teams have been ranked for the last, 3 years? Roughly 4? I don't know how long it's been since this stuff came in.
Probably about 5, actually, I think.
Bloody hell. I'm getting old as well. But sure, under that premise, they'd be higher rated. I still don't think they'd be that threatening at these events. They'd probably be one of the teams that's constantly there. You can't ignore them. And they will be more of a threat than literally right now heroic. But they're not, to me, a threat to go deep just because they can't rely on some of their players for half the game. They can't rely on their players to keep it together for 30, it's now not 30 rounds anymore, it's 24 rounds. I think they do have a lot of just key issues that will keep them being a flawed but fun, but, explosive but rarely consistent team. It's a dichotomy that they have that makes them interesting, but not really very productive when it comes to wins.
I think the struggle for me is that this team reminds me so much of what I thought Bad News Eagles would end up turning into. Actually a little bit more structure, and I think they actually have better teamwork than Bad News Eagles have ever displayed. And for a long time, there was a lot of soul searching being done on Eternal Fire at one point, and I was a big fan of ragging on them for playing terrible Counter-Strike back then. But they actually do play good when they make when they make calls towards bomb sites. Like, actually do trade well. They set themselves up with flashes and all that stuff. This is what I thought Bad News Eagles would turn into, but I also think that there's just like a hard limit on how far these guys can go, because I just don't know that I can trust them in pressure moments. Like, weirdly, on comebacks, they can be very fiery and like very engaged. But it takes so much to actually find like the crazy Deagle Xantares round, or like a weird Wicadia flanking triple kill that will set off that spark. And I feel like those conditions are always so difficult to actually get to.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, the emotional side is part of it, but I mean, certainly if we're talking about the downsides of Eternal Fire, I don't want to say they're one-dimensional, because that's a bit extreme, but they have the way they like to play Counter-Strike, and they're going to play it. And they're going to come into the game, Major's going to call his game, which actually is much less individual than I think people probably realize. I mean, they're quite, from what I recall, Eternal Fire loves calling a lot of all-in rounds on the T side, where they're like 4-1 and group up on a site and try and hit it early, and try and that's not super individualistic. Individualistic would just be defaulting and let Xantares do what he wants. So where Eternal Fire has problems is probably strategic depth. If they're playing an opponent like a MOUZ, who can push them around and test different part of this team, or show them different looks, maybe Eternal Fire doesn't have the options to fall back on. Potentially also, as much as Major's probably playing some of his better Counter-Strike for the last few years, him and Calix probably are still, in some senses, liabilities. And certainly, if I was playing this team, I would somewhat canter my T rounds to their positions, I think. It might be a little bit easier. I certainly wouldn't go anywhere near Xantares. So I think there are I mean, our biggest criticisms probably of Eternal Fire are that they're a fully Turkish team. So how do you upgrade these players and stall out these problems? I think they are making the most of the Turkish scene.
They've tried. They certainly tried.
Absolutely are. And Michael is right that this, for everyone that really liked Bad News Eagles, Eternal Fire plays better Counter-Strike. Definitely. Definitely more fundamental, definitely more rooted in good decisions. And Major can call a good game. I actually don't know why their ceiling is quite, their floor has been as low as we've seen it at times this year, because I do actually think they have quite a good fundamental base of Counter-Strike. I do like the roles with Vikade. It confuses me a bit, and it could be the case that it's out of the game stuff, emotions, communication goes to shit when they're playing bad or something. But I actually have faith in this team. I don't know why.
Yeah.
The time I've seen them play enough good Counter-Strike. I like the roles. Xantares is an absolutely world-class player. And I think Major calls a good game. I think there's a lot of reasons why this team at least won't go anywhere at the level they're playing at the moment. And I really do think, especially with someone like Xantares, they can just beat a MOUZ in a series. It could happen. Could they win 2 to win the event and they're going to need to? I don't know. But I would not be surprised at all if they play spoiler to one of the heavy hitters.
Yeah, that's all you need. For an underdog pick in this kind of event, you need them to hit top 4. And that's you don't need to upset them multiple times to make that happen. You need a good, favorable matchup, maybe in the opener. Maybe you do get the heroic in your first actual main event game. Then later down the line, you need to make an upset happen. So they definitely could. I just struggle to see them repeating the feat, obviously, as we've mentioned a few times. Right. I've taken a team who I've had some weird feelings about. Let's put it that way. I've taken Falcons.
Oh, this is an episode. I'm enjoying this. Go for it.
I'm starting to regret it, but at the same time, I look at the other picks and I'm like, I don't like them more. So I'm just going to have to live with this and labor.
There are only so many teams.
There are only so many teams, right?
It turns out this event is MOUZ and then a load of teams that should be better than they are.
A lot of teams that in recent memory have been kind of disappointing. But Falcons, Now, they made it through the Cologne play-in, which, coming into the play-in, I honestly thought they'd disappoint the hell out of me and go straight home. To be fair, they almost did. They lost to Eternal Fire, and I started catastrophizing. I was like, oh no. Oh no. Then I saw they were playing alternate attacks, and I thought, okay, even for Falcons, alternate attacks, the charity attendee, the Make-A-Wish kid of the event, they cannot, and they didn't. Thank the heavens. They did not. They beat them 2-0.
Almost lost both maps, to be fair.
They did look way too close, but they did take it home. And at that point, I'm like, all right, this is just Falcons. But they do win against Big. Okay, that's a losable game. And they start playing better Counter-Strike than I've seen in a while. And Sun Pius is waking up. I'm thinking, oh, is this the Falcons I was promised? The bare minimum I was expecting was a good caller, a good AWPer, and then some pieces that caller can work with to make a functional T side happen. I thought that would be what I'd get out of them. And historically, I really hadn't. This event, we got the first inkling that was possible. They took a map off MOUZ, and it was the MOUZ map pick. They made Ancient close. They, again, played way better Counter-Strike than we've expected over the last few events. Sure, this time we don't get explosive Sunpiers, but we at least get something out of the Rifling Core, who've been around forever. They know what a MOUZ is. Finally, they looked like they actually did. They remembered, they fragged. I was fairly content. Beating Virtus Pro, not that impressive. I'm just move straight on, honestly. Just whatever.
Yeah,
but their phase match was one of their better showings in terms of like how they've been eliminated. I have to just put a silver lining on that cloud that they got 2-0'd. They've looked a lot worse whilst going straight home from events. This was a decent run, at least in Cologne. And coming into this event, they're playing teams who they have managed to beat in the past. Not Eternal Fire, but the rest of them. They actually have been at least a step above. They've looked like a better team than those. I'm going to give Falcons a good chance to make it through. And if they continue to get better, as they hinted they might be doing so at the end of the last event, they've got a chance to make perhaps the ugliest upset happen to go all the way to the top 4 here.
How much more time do you give Falcons before you blow up the roster, or at least get rid of 2 pieces from this roster, is my question.
The moment Nico takes my blank check and actually fills it in, the entire roster's gone. That's all I'm saying. If I'm the Falcons owner, that's how it works for me.
The thing is, I know we like to joke about like the Saudis having a lot of money, because they do have a lot of money.
Yeah.
But this is also a business. Like, they have spent a lot of money on this roster, and they have been categorically shit. I really do struggle to think about how long this Falcons project stays the way it is when you've got the major coming up. You know, you've got a calendar year next year, especially, where like having good performances and making it deep in tournaments actually has so much more weight, because the higher you are in world rankings, the more you get invited to other stuff that is happening within the calendar year. I do think that they are maybe, I'd say, 2 events off of making that change, but I don't actually, do they even have the time for that before the major? Probably not. Everything will have to wait until after the major, I imagine. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, they've got Pro League before the major. I don't know.
Either
I don't know
way,
who's
you're
going to
not
be
getting
available.
Like, you're getting agents out of
Yeah.
contracts.
Yeah, that's not happening.
Yeah. So, yeah, I find it hard to be excited about Falcons when it is literally, oh, you guys didn't just bottom out at Cologne. I'm happy for you, I guess. You guys have major winners, you've got like great accomplished players, and yet this is the worst any of it's ever looked. So it's, I don't know, I sympathize. So yeah, I guess Falcons gets a little pity. Yeah, you can do it.
Not
a depressing state of affairs.
I think one other aspect with Falcons, I actually think, I mean, on the one hand, you're right that, you know, they might have let's say their backings have very deep pockets. Their backers are very deep pockets, but they're not a charity. No. If you look at that region as a whole and what they're doing in esports, especially, as well as plenty of other sports, is they're not messing around. They're obviously throwing massive checks down, but they're trying to build something. They're trying to diversify their economy. They're trying to actually have a fan base and physical. I mean, I know we're obviously an online sport, but still have physical roots and all of this sort of thing. And they want teams to practice out there and all of this sort of stuff. And there's no universe where the management of this team is happy with the trajectory, and that's the key word for Falcons, is that if they can see light at the end of the tunnel, they're not going to be, they probably wouldn't make a roster move. But are they showing massive signs of improvement? Obviously, I saw plenty of them at DreamHack Summer on their route to finishing second. And a question I posed on the desk is, if this team continues to not work, especially after, let's say, 3 or 4 months, I mean, probably there now, or maybe a little bit longer with Dupree in the team. Let's just explain that Dupree move quickly. So the move go from Boros and then a bit of a standing period, then Dupree is signed. The move to Dupree, and they've said this in interviews, is a very deliberate move to pick up a player that's experienced, that has good communication, that can fill the roles they want, and will improve the floor of this team. That is the goal. That's why they brought him in. Maybe there are more skilled players, but with Dupree, yeah, you might not be the best team in the world, but you can be a top 5 team with Dupree on that lineup. So that's the whole idea, right? They bring in Dupree, and Falcons like, we're going to stabilize now. We don't have Boros and some of his antics. We have a solid lineup that can communicate well, all experienced players. Everybody knows what they're doing, and they look pretty decent at DreamHack Summer. That was very early into having Dupree, but obviously since then, the odd series has played well, but all in all, not the best Counter-Strike. And anyway, the point I posed on the desk was that if this lineup with Dupree doesn't work, I hate to say it, but you got to look at Snappy and Zonic and say, well, it's probably going. That's just the reality of any high performing team. Any business that was in a position like they are in the regular business sense would look at top management, wouldn't they, and say, we're, our resources are what it looks like on paper isn't panning out. We're going to have to make a management change. So I think both of them are in quite treacherous positions. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them actually steps down if the team doesn't improve. Because equally for all of these players, every single player, maybe with the exception of Dupree, joins this lineup to be on a team that competes for major titles. It's the whole point. Is to build a new legacy. If you're someone like Zonic, it's to run your own project and have huge influence and prove again that you can win with an international team. And they're obviously not doing that. So there's only they're on borrowed time as a lineup. Absolutely.
But it's like when you look at the Falcons organization and what they want to do for the Esports World Cup, they're in like 1 billion esports titles, basically. Like Falcons went out and bought a lot of like the top talents within each of those different esports sectors to win the like massive the organization. How many medals did you get? You're the best organization award for the Esports World Cup. And it does feel like, I don't know, it feels like cheating a bit when they just got like basically they've thrown unlimited budget basically at the problem. But like you said, for them, it is a business, diversifying assets. They want to build a fan base. If they can create a Falcons brand that is basically, hey, all the best players in the world are going to be housed here because we are paying them exorbitant amount of money, but that's what we're willing to do to get wins. Then if Counter-Strike is already a very notoriously high salary entry market. So if they're already paying that high salary and they're also not getting results with that, you just think like, why even bother with Counter-Strike in that same scope? And if you are going to spend that amount of money, you are expecting them to win. So yeah, I think they're just in a very tenuous position where the organization has very clear objectives that they have to have sort of laid out that just aren't being met.
I'd love to know I don't think they've done many interviews since Dupree joined, or at least, and I haven't read any of them recently, but I don't know if they've actually said, but I'd be very intrigued to hear what they think the problem now is with the team. Because certainly with Boros and that period after Boros, it's so easy to point the finger and say that we're not communicating well enough, we don't have a well-rounded team. We bring in Dupree to fix some of these issues, but we're still playing him in. I wonder now where they point the finger, because I think it's much harder with Falcons now to say what is the problem. Now, I haven't sat down and watched their demos close enough to give an answer to that, but something at its core isn't working with this team. They've got such good players, and not just, you can look at someone like Jim Fat or Donk and say they're obviously incredible players, but these are well-rounded players as well on Falcons, which makes it all the more surprising that they're having so many problems, because they should have solutions to so many problems, yet they're not presenting a great deal of them. So I don't know, man. It's a real perplexing team. I think even, let's say they played for a different org and they didn't have that pressure in a sense over them, I still think we'd look at this lineup and ask a lot of questions about what are we achieving with this level of talent, and as I'm saying, versatile talent. And I mean, even someone like Sun Pius is kind of renowned and is seen for being a vocal player that helped build that Movistar team, and can call around himself and is assertive. Is he the same player now as he was back then? No. So yeah, I mean, Falcons in a sense is quite depressing to watch, because we all know how good they could be with those players.
Good pick.
Yeah, thanks. Love it. It's okay. I've got a bit of a cushion. I can take some risks.
That's fair.
But on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, a team who their world ranking is quite flattering right now. They've got a few fans. Yumi, who have you picked up as your first underdog?
I've gone with what Falcons consistently feel: pain. Yeah, Brazilian pain. A big Uzera fan. Snow is honestly, I did fear that he would struggle when they got to bigger events, that Snow would just vanish, because I think the clear indicator for me a lot for these young players is that when they first join teams, if they're struggling against domestic opposition, like Snow did, like just get integrating into the team, I hesitate to think they'll have good performances at LAN. I always assume there's going to be that same sort of adjustment period, just in terms of betting in. But Snow, to be honest, played fine and seemed to be screaming at everybody, like kind of a la Donk, but he wasn't donking on them the same way. And I just think this team is fun because the players are very clearly empowered by the result that they had at the last major. Going back to domestic competition, all of them are playing much better than any of the sort of lead time going up to that major as well. Like Lux looks better, Kawes looks more confident, and NQZ can still have some maps where he dominates. So yeah, I think this Pain team just has so much firepower. I think Nero picked them the last time we spoke to him, and yeah, after seeing what they were like at Cologne, I think more confidently weigh in that I think Pain are, just a solid team to watch right now.
Yeah, they don't do anything really that poorly. Like, just overall, there's not a clear, massive deficiency. I do always struggle, like myself. Like, it's been a bit weird following like Mongols and this team, like seeing just that fragging IGL sort of picking up a team around them. In this team, especially a lot of kids, and having to do all of that grunt work on the fragging end, also having to call and bed these players in. It's hard to not be impressed, but also it's always hard to see how far that can go, like to see if they can actually take it and transition to the next level. This kind of event is perfect for them, though. They get to stretch their legs. They get to be against teams who don't have particularly experienced lineups in a lot of cases, maybe can't even match them for firepower in others when they do have those veterans. This should be an event where they look really good, really promising. I'm looking at their matchups, their group. They've even got a pretty nice group for themselves. So I think, no, Pain is a really solid pick right now.
Pain's a hard team to size up because of the proportion of games they play domestically. They don't play a lot of international Counter-Strike. The fun thing as well about their run through the play-ins in Cologne in the main event is they only beat one team who's not a domestic team to their region. That's the Mongols, 2-1. So I don't know what to make of this side. I remember coming into the end of last season when they did play a few international events. It was the same question of like, how well is it going to translate? Are they used to even the travels, some of these younger players, and coming over to Europe and betting into an event versus playing either domestically or regionally? So I think they asked a lot of questions with Pain. They certainly show good signs, and they're also obviously the main thing is that like especially if you're going off stats on some of these players, some of the teams they'll play domestically are not of the I mean, it's not like playing in Europe where there's a depth. There's a depth. You know, the 150th best European team is actually quite good. The bottom end teams in some of these regional events are not great, and that's just how it is. That's how it's going to be for a long time. So it's really hard, especially with someone like Snow has mentioned. It's really hard to say they look like this domestically, and then plot out further how that's going to work at an international stage. So that for me would be my fears with Pain. I certainly enjoy this lineup. I like the storyline that they've just got absolutely fisted so many times with losing good players to this team. So many times. The team they had at the end of 2022 with Zevi and Skulls, they didn't make Rio. They really should have, because they were of a caliber to top 8 the Rio Major. That's how good CS they were playing at that time. And it was a shame that lineup didn't hold together, obviously, and absolute smorgasbord of roster moves since then. But it is fun that Pain, they go under the radar a bit, especially under some of the bigger brands like MIBR Imperial, but they do a good job of their scouting. And a lot of the top stars of their region in the future are on Pain at some point. So keep an eye on some of these guys, that's for sure.
Yeah, full credit to them. They are slowly more and more sort of fitting that mold of like the Mongols of their region. Like, they will bring up players. I mean, sure, unlike the Mongols, there's places for their players to go, to be poached to. So they don't have to refresh them just because they're brutally making cuts. It's just because they get stolen away. But the fact they still outperform like brands like Fluxo, who have been able to pick off guys like Zevi, I think is a big credit to them. Hopefully at this event, they continue to build on that. As I said, I do think this is a group where they have a chance to make that real. Let's talk about us. We got more underdogs because there's a lot of underdogs to pick from here. Allan, your second pick. Who have you gone with?
I need to remember. Oh, yes. Here we go. Here we go.
We're getting to the reaches here, are we?
So I had some fun with this one. I did choose 9Z, and then I changed my mind. I thought of picking 9 pandas. This will all make sense. Bear with. I thought of picking 9 pandas because I was sat there thinking, especially when the result news came out that there's going to be this swap with Clax. It's such a bizarre story. I mean, how often do you hear that sort of thing? I mean, you see it in traditional sports a little bit, but it's such a different scenario. The framing of it was weird. We'll get into some of the talking points, I think, from that in a moment. But they have this swap, and I'm just sat here thinking, Result is such a good player that you look at 9 Pandas' lineup, you're like, this team could do damage. Result is a seriously good player at his positions, especially. I mean, he doesn't play great positions, but he plays a lot of anchor and lurk spots, and some of those spots are traditionally some of the hardest spots to play, or the least fragging roles, and he makes it work. So I originally was going to take 9 Pandas with the angle of, Result is here. Now this lineup can do damage. They're certainly going to be underrated. As an underdog, they're a good pick in that sense, maybe. And I sat there and I thought, you know what? I'm wrong. I need to pick Aurora. And the reason I need to pick Aurora is that when Aurora made the roster move to pick up Result and sign that player, I was certain this team was going to instantly get better. I was certain that Aurora, that ended last year in good form, was knocking on the door of top 20. I was certain that bringing a player of Result's caliber in the roles he plays as well, replacing someone like Celta, who, not to disparage him, is not this mechanical player that Result is. Yeah. Result also has a good head on his shoulders in game, at least, and makes good decisions. So I looked at that team. I was like, "Well, okay, we're definitely we're going inside the top 20 now," and they didn't do it. They didn't play as good Counter Strike for my money with Result over that season. They might have had some highs. They might have had some series where they looked good, but they didn't play as good Counter Strike. Now, in the swap news story, they heavily hint that Result, let's just say, he's toxic. It certainly reads that way when I read the literature on the topic. It really certainly looks like Result was not an easy person to work with, and that's why they made the move. So I think that's actually how to frame with Aurora. Clax, if I look at this team and I say Clax has replaced Celta, I'm feeling it again. I'm like, this is cooking. This is looking good. We've got a lineup that I know worked in last year. Presumably, Clax doesn't have the same issues outside of the server. Aurora should be better. And that's why Aurora are the underdog. Eat them apples.
My problem I have with this is I don't even think it had anything to do with the result move. I think I had this opinion about Aurora. They did the most travel that they would have done throughout their entire professional careers at the end of last season. Like they ramped up at the start of the season. They got to all these LAN events. They were traveling more than they're used to. When they came back home, they were instantly playing like online finals for the CCT global finals or whatever, like RES, all these other things. And I think that was probably the most stressful period of their playing careers. And I also think that will probably lead players to be a bit more toxic. Like they're going from LAN event to LAN event, and then they're playing garbage Counter-Strike compared to the standard that they had set kind of at the start of of last season. So I think it's weird. I actually think Nine Pandas got a hell of a deal. Clax for Result. Like Result is he's like a heavy god in that he's not like a very resource intensive player. He will play for himself and he will find a multi-kill in like mid to late rounds quite frequently. I don't know the direction that Aurora are headed right now, because I've watched one of their games recently and it did not impress. You know, I think that's kind of where I'm at with them, is that I don't think they even know what the future holds at the moment.
I have no faith in this move working overnight, and that's essentially what it needs to do, because they played Monday, and I actually caught a good chunk of this game against Sashi, and they were abysmal. Like, losing a series to Sashi by itself should be a red flag, but the way they played really wasn't impressive. Clax himself had a dreadful time, and I've got to believe now that they're going to come into Belgrade and look like an entirely different five-man lineup, essentially, to the way they played just this week. Now, I know you made your whole impassioned speech about drawing the line, about one series, one event. When it comes to you've just made a move, the first time I see you, you look horrendous, and then I've got to somehow believe in you switching it all up. Nah, I can't really abide by that rule, especially given how they weren't playing that great. Just like as a four-man with a different five, how toxic can he be for it just that to magically turn their entire season like around? I think they're going to need a little more time before I can believe in them, and I agree the better pick here probably should have been Nine Pandas. But I think either way, it's kind of rough to justify, seeing as they are the bottom end of this group. But the Aurora, it's not looking good. I'm kind of mystified.
It's like Aurora and Nine Pandas were just a package deal, and that we're going to talk about both teams probably, regardless
no
of
matter
which one you
how. No matter how you do it, like,
can they play each other?
They
could.
Yeah, they are in the same group.
They're in the same group in the play-in. It's a double elim.
They could eliminate each other. Like, one of them eliminates the other one. They're the bottom.
That would be... I mean,
so
first of all, I was running out of teams to pick, right?
Yeah.
There weren't that many options.
For context, this was the last pick of all of our picks, so
it wasn't necessarily the cream of the crop as it was to go for. But you cannot deny that this is probably more exciting than the event. See, if Aurora and Nine Pandas get to play each other on stage on LAN, it is on LAN, isn't it? The playing, right?
Yes.
Studio LAN, I believe. Yes.
Good. Yeah. Right. Hope so. If they're on stage, if they're going to be handshakes at the end, who knows? Who knows? Maybe Result just goes up and gives them evils or something after the game.
It'll be the socials manager that like slaps away Result's hand.
Is it the Aurora socials guy who's absolutely unhinged?
I mean, if he's the one that controls their Twitter, probably, yes.
Yeah, they do some stuff. But I mean, I am all for seeing an Aurora Nine Pandas game. I actually don't know who won out of this trade. I mean, obviously you don't know inside of the teams.
No.
Result's a better player than Clax. End of... No, there's no discussion here. Result plays better Counter-Strike. That doesn't mean that Aurora can't be a good team with Clax. I did have a check. Clax played very close roles to what Result was playing, so it's actually quite a clean swap, role-wise. Playstyle might not be so smooth. But I have some fledgling confidence in Aurora. I do think Aurora will be better
Sure.
than 9 Pandas.
Okay.
Not
I mean,
that's
sure.
necessarily the great superstar battle we all wanted to see, but it is the one I want to see most. I'd enjoy that more than the final.
I mean, I'll endorse your enthusiasm. I just can't really get on board with the same idea. But no, I think it's going to be a great lower final for these two.
But I don't think Klax is, like Klax for them is more of an anomaly than Result is for 9 Pandas, because Result and Chalfie played together in Forest, didn't they? It's like,
Yes.
So in a lot of ways, they'll have more of a characterization of how he is as a player versus, Klax will have to, I think, he'll have to more sort of naturally actually slot into roles and like figure it out and find what fits and all that stuff. Whereas I feel like there's probably going to be less of a lead time for Result, considering how fresh this move is. I don't know. I'm still leaning towards those Pandas, but
we'll just have to
they
see
are
it.
endangered.
We won't have to wait very long for that matchup. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
1:30 on Monday, best of 3, lower final for Group B. That's when that's going to go down.
Exactly, I'll be there.
I'll be
flying out
tuning
for
in, yeah. That'll be one hell of a matchup. But speaking of picks that, going to be fun to justify, I've taken another underdog, of course. And this is a team that actually had some people excited, I think, when it was initially announced, just because of it seemed like the right place for Nafany to be. And that's BetBoom. Now, it's a bit of a diss to say he should be on a tier 2 team, but it's fairly true that he wasn't really thriving at tier 1, and going down one step was probably a good time for him. He could rebuild back up. He's still a really young guy, still has a new legacy he can forge. His story doesn't have to end with him being the problem, in quotation marks, on Cloud9. But let's address this roster in its entirety. They have some of the most talented youngsters Russia has produced for the last 2 years. Obviously, excluding the ones who found their way onto Team Spirit. This is a pretty banger roster of aimers. That cannot be denied. And they play a style that suits that kind of guy. They're not going to be particularly strat heavy. They're going to be very firepower dominant, and I think that's going to be effective for them at this event as well. MOUZ has been a revelation for them. Those who knew him before this team knew he had something going, but we did not expect him to roll like he did when he came into BetBoom. He's been absolutely outstanding. Zorte has actually been not even at his career peak on this roster, which has been disappointing, and yet he's still been very, very strong. So I think the weaknesses of this team are going to be probably strategic, and maybe this version of Chiron in these roles hasn't really been what he's ideally suited for. But as a team overall, we're looking for an upset run here. I think this is as scary as a roster can be, without really including a tier 1 ready player. And I think they're gonna rock the boat a little bit. Making it through a group with Pain, 9Z, and Falcons is obviously going to be difficult, but they're definitely primed to make those upset happen, and they have the players for it. So I'm just going to cross my fingers and hope they can make every game into deathmatch. That's what I'm aiming for here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they like sending it and running at you. I actually can't knock that, but they actually execute and they go for more tactical plays than Cloud9 ever really did at the end of their tenure with Nafany. So is that Nafany's fault? I don't know, but he's clearly changed his ways. It is not just let's just default and aim map them when we get into bomb sites. Like, they do actually try and set people up properly. Like, they create opportunities for Magno.
He has changed his individual tendencies as well. Like, he doesn't take as many really dumb opening deaths as he used to. He doesn't feel like he has to be the burden of all risk at times, like it felt on Cloud9. Like, he has toned it down.
Yeah. But that's like Hampus sort of realizing he has other players that can entry for him instead of him doing it himself, right? Yeah, no, I don't hate the roster. I actually think you're right on the money. Like, this is as good of a project in terms of, like, outside of the academy systems that the the Russian scene, like these are great players that a lot of other teams within the region should actually be trying to pluck from. But yeah, I kind of want Zorte to come back. Like, I don't see that guy clutch as much. I don't see him. I can't reliably look at Zorte in late rounds and think he's going to close rounds like he was when we were the most excited about him. You know, that's what I think we were hoping he would go into a bigger roster at some point or another and make that jump. But he's had a deterioration in his form, and I think some of that came down to like not being confident in his AWPing anymore. Like he was just buying P90s and Galils and stuff instead of AWPs because he just wanted to run with the pack.
Yeah, he's a talented rifler, but not good enough to drop the AWP. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
An interesting team. Let's talk about Nafany. It's obviously the centerpiece of this team, at least the lightning rod. One everyone's going to focus on. When Nafany fell out of Cloud9, the formerly Gambit, of course, a lot of criticism, somewhat rightfully so. The easiest way to criticize that team was to say, when you had Axile and Shiro in such form, how could you not perform better as a team? I think that actually, obviously, Maui, especially vocal about, you know, Nafany's calling and his style, but the real crux of his argument, I think, was always that. I think people glossed over that as well, and I think it's an indefensible argument. And sorry, right other way around. It's that you can't disprove the argument. I mean, it's so strong. You can't have players that good and not win tournaments.
It's the same thing that people levy against Hooksy, for example, or Art when that was around the same time.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, that's been a disaster, that Furia project with Art in the last few years. Yeah, so Nafany comes out of that project, and I think it's such a bizarre scenario for Nafany when he was calling at the end of that team, because they were playing a similar brand of Counter-Strike that they always had with that core of players. Going back to Gambit youngsters, they're playing similar brand of Counter-Strike. When they were at their best, probably when they were still Gambit, Nafany won a lot of opening duels. And the way he likes to call is that Nafany will call around himself. He will put himself in the thick of it, and he'll call around himself, and he will try and make a move, and then he'll move his pieces around his move. And when he was losing a lot of duels at the end of his tenure on Cloud9, it wasn't working. He was giving up a lot of opening kills. And I think, not to kind of defend him, but I think it's a very understandable position that Nafany wouldn't change the style of calling when he knows he's won big tournaments in the past. And he's got incredible players. It might be there's surely plenty of fallacies. There's surely logical problems with looking at it that way, but it's an understandable position for someone to take. Is that this has worked in the past? It's worked with these players. It has worked for me. I'm going to keep trying it. So in some ways, I totally agree that this is Nafany's level. To come down to a team like BetBoom and be brought out of that environment and that mindset, and equally to look at his players and say, I don't have these pieces anymore. I don't have Axile, who can play the edge of the map and find endless random, they're not random, but at least from where he was sat at his PC, just the opening kills galore in the top right, or Shiro that can hold an angle and play incredible late rounds. So I certainly think for Nafany, he surely has learned a lot about himself and how to call coming down to this. And I actually agree that being as young as he is, his career isn't over. And there's absolutely no doubt that he knows Counter-Strike. I mean, you don't play at the level he has unless you know the game. So I certainly think this project with him leading could work well. I'd actually really love the storyline if Nafany could call this team, or at least call himself into a position where he gets picked up again by a top team. I think it'd be so much fun. And I actually think he could do it. I'm not necessarily saying that much from these BetBoom teams to entice me that he's ready for an elite level side again. But it's good fun. And I want to see more of it. And then, Zorte is the exciting piece, isn't he? Siren is also interesting. Siren's interesting. Siren's fun. When Siren played for Spirit, him and Patsy, of course, came up. They both come up from the academy. I think they did.
Yeah,
they did.
They came up together. Patsy obviously took the limelight. Because Patsy at that time, we're talking like 2022, when I watched Patsy, he was like Yekindar reborn, played all the same spots, same play style. I wouldn't be surprised if he just, force fed himself for Yekindar demos. So it kind of took the spotlight away from Siren, but Siren was a good player in his role playing positions. Obviously didn't stay on that project and now is here. So Siren interests me a lot because he was good on that Spirit team, but he was never the focal point. He wasn't talked about much as a player, but he's never bad. And certainly if you're dropping down to this level, which is the level below that Spirit team was playing, Siren can definitely be a good player here. He can definitely be a solid piece for this team and be dangerous. So he's another one to look out for. I think all in all, it's just like it's quite a well-composed lineup, isn't it? I still question Chiron. I mean, obviously his career is massively bizarre, but there's in ways like even comparing them to a team like Eternal Fire, like you can still sit there and look at Calyx and be like, I don't know, man. Like I'm not sure this is gonna ensure long-term success. But for BetBoom, it's actually quite hard to point at any of the players and say, for the level this team is at, you're going to be a detriment. So they are a lot of fun.
Yeah. I'm interested. Like Siren's a weird one for me because when I watched him on Spirit, I always felt like he's not like volatile or explosive. Like, he's very steady. He doesn't have like the crazy mechanics that could ever really make him like that sort of star player you think of traditionally. But he would just be, if you need a player who's going to make the like right positional play, be over your shoulder and trade properly, effectively, he just does that very well. I've always been content with the way he plays his rifle rolls when everything's properly set up and structured. It's just in those crazy volatile like moments where like, there's chaos around and you need someone who's just going to do something crazy to like resolve a post plant or make an entry happen in the last few seconds. He doesn't quite have the mechanical edge to do it, but when the rounds are going well, he can find all the trade kills, all the right moments to frag, and he can be quite effective. And Chiron, man, this guy used to be that sort of absurd 30% OPK attempt rate guy who just run out, bang heads. Now he's some sort of multi-tool on this roster. I don't quite get his spot, like his actual role. I just know that he is a gifted guy. I just don't get what he's meant to be doing. Like in terms of how his career's progressed, it's just been a bit weird.
Yeah, Siren is funny. We talk about Chiron, but I also think he is a bit of an enigma. But I think Siren's just funny because, like you're sort of saying, he's not actually ever really set up to succeed. So you don't really get those like weird highlights. And he was consistent in the same way that you maybe look at like a Shush, but Shush will get like a crucial multi-kill late into games, or he'll like solo defend bomb sites or actually bail them out of chaos rounds where Siren failed. So it can be, I'm not surprised Siren wasn't really talked about in a very positive light last time he was on Spirit, just because if you don't see rounds like that, it becomes a lot harder to sort of value that stock when all you do is sit in the default, throw a flash, maybe trade. Like there's a lot of players that can fulfill that role, I think, and maybe he flies under the radar that way. Yeah, Chiron's interesting because he is like very weirdly unknown. He speaks multiple languages and he's a very aggressive player, but I really don't think he doesn't really play that role the same way on BetBoom anymore. Yeah. Now it's all really Magno's that focal point. So, but
that was the initial confusion for me. Then the roster move happens, they bring in Manoyas. I'm like, oh, so they're who's doing what? And then immediately, Chiron just falls off those spots, doesn't take any of those openings.
And he's playing more late rounds as well, and I don't really know that I trust Chiron in late rounds. So I don't know what's going on with him and his roles, but he still shoots people. So that's all really BetBoom, I think, need.
I'm just going through their positions on every map. And the first question I have to ask is, especially regarding Chiron, is like, who decided these spots? I mean, who was going through the list and was like, okay, you're going to play ramp on nuke, Anubis, all right, it's not a ramp-like position. You're going to play B Dark and play the most important spot on the map. Ancient, he goes to A anchor. Mirage, he's short. Just 2, he's back in long. And then on Vertigo, he's the main A rifler. It's like, they don't even know what he is. he's all over the shop. He's playing some like, I'd call it like big site anchor in a lot of these spots. But then equally plays some rotator roles, and certainly I'd have thought pre-Magno he was playing exclusive rotator, or at least majority rotator spots. So, I mean, they certainly look like they're having a bit of an identity crisis. I mean, some teams, FaZe is quite an infamous example of a team that makes it work, where they go map by map and then they just plot out who plays best in what positions. But it's not. They're the exception that proves the rule. For most teams, you have your anchors, you have your rotators, and you get used to it. So it's certainly funky. I wonder how BetBoom make it work, because if I did that on endpoint, I would have been sacked. I think.
Yeah, well, let's see if they can make it happen. I'm hoping they do. But bring us home, Yumi. You've got your final underdog to pick, and I'm sure you've gone with someone really reliable, always plays their best Counter-Strike, and can make a deep run happen. Who have you taken?
Yeah, you know it, baby. I've picked Skulls and Furia. Yep, that's it. Skulls and Furia. That's what's saying on the page. Yeah, I just don't. I mean, I hate Furia. I've hated Furia for a while.
What an endorsement that is to start with.
my angle here is this is a much better looking Furia than the one that we've seen for the past like 6 months. It's not much of a bar to set. I know they had Kai, who was always a scapegoat stopgap player that they brought up from the academy that was never fit to join the main team. I get it. But Skulls looks far more comfortable. I think you could tell that speaking in native tongue, and you know, he's playing fairly similar positions as he was when he was on Liquid, but he's getting far more output out of those positions. He is playing and getting support from his rotators, I think, faster than he did on Liquid as well. And for me, this Furia is one that actually can grow into something that is much more dangerous. I think my fear was that they didn't have aggressive pieces on this team, and I think Cello had to step into those roles, and I think he has so far, and he's done an okay enough job that I mean, there's still room for improvement. And the rest is just kind of figuring out how Yuri kind of stacks up with the way that the roles are shifting slightly. You know, he would be that right-hand man to Queserato, but even Queserato, I think, has had a couple of struggles as of late. So I think the veterans on this team are having to adjust to the way that Skulls is bedding in, Cello's role swapping. But I think these are all the correct steps, you know, ways in which you can't, you don't have to rely on Fallen as an AWPer, because I think he is probably the biggest sore spot in terms of like proper roles. But I think he can call a better game with Skulls now in the way that the roles are changing.
I also want to agree that this is, you know, going to be a far stronger version of Furia than we've seen for a long time. It probably will come to pass eventually. I just think it's going to take a lot of work, and that work hasn't been done yet.
Right.
Sure that they had a massive like shock to the system or / embarrassment when they got pulverized by Vitality at Cologne. I don't think they've, in the couple weeks they've had since then, figured out all these little difficulties. Like Cello on the aggressive spots, he's taking the aggressive fights. He's certainly doing that part of the game. He's not winning enough of them, and that's been an issue. They're lacking firepower because not only is he trying to fight his way into more frags, Queserato clearly hasn't quite found his comfort amongst the new players, as he's not quite the superstar rifler he has been in the past. So it still reeks of mediocrity is the way to put it. I think they're just not going to be that dangerous. Could they beat a 9 Pandas? At least once, yeah. I've got a bad feeling they go out maybe on Tuesday next week. I'm going to put another date on it.
I think Furia needs to beat 9 Pandas. Like,
Yeah, they could beat them on the opening matchup.
They've got to beat 9 Pandas. That would be a disaster.
But then they'll face them in the consolidation final, and that's where they go home. I've got a bad feeling about this team. That they're just going to go back to
beat 9
disappointing.
Pandas. It's going to be Aurora. Furia is interesting. Right, first up, a lot of the arguments, a lot of the framing of Falcons actually applies to Furia, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
When you have, then this has been the storyline for years now, but Yuri and Keserato as a pairing, as a star duo, they're not fucking around. Easily top 10 in terms of a star power duo. Maybe they're borderline top 5. I mean, they're that good.
Right now?
Possibly, maybe they're not playing the best CS, but when a team's rebuilding, it's hard to see that. They certainly have it in them. And CS2 will suit them as well. More so than Go did. So first up with Furia, when you have players that good, there's an expectation. And the minimum should be a top 10 team. And Furia knows that. And that's obviously why there's been a slew of changes in the last... I mean, they realized it maybe coming into this year, or maybe at the very end of last season especially, that something serious had to change. Art goes, Guri goes. They seem to have drafted a load of assistant coaches. They have a whole armada of them behind the team as well. So Furia... I mean, first of all, like, Furia is an organization. When we're having this conversation in the first place of who's an underdog, who's a competitor for the title, Furia as an org and with some of these players, they should kind of expect to be in that conversation to win the event. Obviously, results of late don't hold that to much snuff, but that's kind of what this team should be gunning for in the long term. Cello is an intriguing player. When Cello joined this team, for me, he was actually in contention with Keserato for the best player in Brazil. He's playing such good CS. Obviously, I imagine Rolls took a big hit coming into Furia when Yuri and Keserato are going to have their spots. Art as well was quite a demanding player. He kind of did what he wanted. So Cello probably took a back seat. But again, you got another top player. Skulls didn't play great on a Liquid, but would explain some of those reasons. Skulls on Pain was an absolutely phenomenal player. He plays some hard roles as well. And as long as Fallen's average, there's so much firepower on this team. So much. And I guess, I imagine you join me, Micah, with the opinion that this is a team where we're going to learn if Fallen is serious about being a top in-game leader again. Because it's kind of now or never. You have so many good pieces. If Fallen can call a good game and get this team on the same page, they absolutely can be top 10. But I need to see it before I believe it.
It's also how much he puts faith in Cello, who's kind of weirdly become his right-hand man. Like, he joined Imperial, they left Imperial together to go to Furia, and yeah, Cello had to take... I do think he had to take some backseat roles, but, you know, do they keep some of the conditions that actually created some of the opportunities for, you know, that Yuri Keserato duo to succeed? You know, a lot of these sort of late round, a lot of information gained already, like decoy-like strategies that Art and Furia used to run, or do you have these? Do you create the conditions for Cello to succeed on entries, and then maybe, you know, that Keserato Yuri duo becomes more of like a late round pairing that actually, you know, closes rounds for you, which I think probably should be their win condition. But yeah, I do think this team has a lot of potential. It's just, yeah, I wonder whether or not roles will work out, because again, op in-game leader is like a very weird one to replace or to fix if you're subpar in one of those fields. Like if you're a shit in-game leader or you're a shit opper, well, you have to replace you, and then you have to replace somebody else as sort of, or a rifler on your team has to take up that mantle somehow. And I don't think that anybody really on this Furia team will make that transition. So yeah, I do think this is about sort of just dialing in, and, you know, this is the most freedom that Fallen will have, proper, I think, a more proper blank slate to actually create a team that can win.
It's the best lineup he's called for since SK Luminosity Core. That is undeniable.
I'd agree with that.
I would even be prepared to hear a case that this, in some ways, is a better line. I mean, if I take Fallen out, because Fallen was playing much better Counter-Strike back then than he is now, he's relative to the field, I could actually see a case that his pieces here are better than SK. Maybe at their peak, Cold Zero and Fur were, truly elite level players, but Kesseratu is no joke. He isn't to be sniffed at. He can be one of the best players in this tournament. I mean, if I'm a team like Heroic, someone like Kesseratu would strike the fear of God into me, because he's really that good. Even Yuri is an absolutely world class player. So Furia is an oddball team, isn't it?
I think Furia got hit. Sorry, I think Furia got hit by map pool. Like, I think this
That's
map
probably
pool
also true. Yeah,
I think really hurts Fallen in the way that he likes to play the most. Actually, like you think about Cobble, Overpass. These actually became like hallmark maps for old Furia. Just the way that they played, like this slower, drawn out, like baiting your opponent to make mistakes type game. So, yeah, I don't know. I have hope, but even though I feel like that's so difficult to say when Furia has been nothing but like a punching bag for the past like 3 years.
Do you think it's an indictment that obviously plenty of rumors about Kesseratu heading in different directions, that he re-signs for this team? I assume he re-signed. I don't actually know if it was announced, but I assume in the process at some point he re-signed. He certainly would have had offers to go elsewhere.
Wasn't it? I swear it was just after Fallen joined that there was that talk about Kesseratu re-signing for another like 2 years, no? Or 2 or 3 years?
I believe he was rumored for Liquid, and they made the Yakindar Cadian team.
Sure.
Well, how much veracity there is to that. But I think it's kind of undeniable that Kesseratu would have had the opportunity to go elsewhere at some point. So clearly Kesseratu believes is probably a strong word, but he sees progression possible in this project. And I don't think he's content with being the 14th, whatever they're ranked the most, 17th ranked in the world.
I think there's also just, whether or not he feels comfortable communicating in English full time or moving overseas. And, for example, Tabson, I think, was marketable at one point to still go international, but decided to stay in his home country and build a local team, so to speak, right? I think there's, not everybody wants to be abroad all the time. Not everybody wants to, purely win championships.
No, I mean, I'm not just talking international. It's also that it seems to be a scene, Brazil, where if I had to guess, financially, there's even worlds where you make a move to much lower ranked teams and don't take a tremendous hit. That's at least the sense I get from like that like a legacy sort of team, even Fluxo, these sort of teams. I imagine I can't see Cold Zero playing for you unless he's getting paid.
Yeah,
that is what I suspect. So it interests me that this Furia team, at least the core of it, through Yuri and Kesseratu, survived. So many ups and downs, more downs than ups. And, as a scene, Brazil needs a top 8 minimum. They want a top 5 team. And Brazil has, for the depth of talent Brazil has, they in some senses deserve it. They have enough players that they should be able to construct a top 5. Maybe top 5 is a bit extreme, but they play themselves in that direction from a top 8 sort of position.
No, I think that's totally reasonable, top 5. With these guys at the top end and the number of young players, the number of options, even the IGLs they have access to, for one nation is quite bountiful, so they should actually be able to find a way. I think that's completely reasonable. And yeah, Kesseratu, I still think he's in Furia just because of home comfort. It is an entirely comfort-based thing. He's got his friends next to him, particularly Yuri. I think those two are just inseparable now. You have to buy the two. You cannot buy one. And his moves abroad, I mean, come on, as if he's going to go change up his entire lifestyle now. He's been too committed to not winning championships to go change everything now. It's been too many years of not winning a damn thing for him to all of a sudden throw it all away.
He may as well move to Finland, if anywhere.
Yeah, he's the king of
Join Havu.
Espu.
That's what I need. We probably should mention the one team here that we've absolutely insulted by not picking them at any point. MOUZ, who...
There's too many almost picks. It was getting a bit...
No, I probably should have picked MOUZ instead of Aurora, but I couldn't resist. It's too much of a good storyline. I guess we won't talk that long on them, but MOUZ is a good team. They're actually the best team in their region.
Yeah,
over Furia.
Probably, yeah.
And what the hell is going on with Martinez? Can you actually believe his storyline? He gets promoted out of nowhere, seemingly, to join Movistar, now Movistar Koi, replacing some Pius who left at the peak of his powers. Martinez, okay, he wasn't that good, but he was pretty good. He actually grew into a really great player for Movistar and Movistar Koi towards the end of his tenure. And he moves over to 9Z, changes continent, presumably lives in Argentina, and continues playing insane Counter-Strike. I need a documentary. I need to see what's going on in Martinez.
I think he went over to South America and somehow got, like, he realized, like, holy, I speak Spanish. I should be even more cocky. I could be this much cooler. And now he's just found a new gear, because I think that is a key to it. He's just gotten so confident. Like, there was a certain amount of that missing at Movistar, and now he's just clicked that extra level up. And no, he's been fantastic. 9Z, they've got a history with like some like pretty good AWPers, but he's probably been their best one, and that's saying something. A perfect accompaniment to DGT and Max. I think they should be easily the best team out of the actual play-in, really.
We didn't pick him.
Didn't pick him. You
what a
didn't
disaster.
Nobody pick him. In theory, the way they've played at international events, even of similar, like maybe slightly lower standing, they have been really good. Just not seeing one of us, I think, looked at them and went, "I'll put money on them again." I think that might be the issue.
They're just too easy of a bet, aren't they? It's just like
Right.
Yeah, it's just it's boring.
Exactly. I can't pick that. I need to pick like Aurora and say this team's gonna be good.
Why bet on the 1.7 odds favorite when I can make a 16-team parlay?
Exactly. Taking, Furia when they haven't done anything for 4 years. Like
that's the play.
That's what we're all about here, guys.
I think what was cursed though is that what they played 3D Max, MIBR, Astralis, and Pain, and they beat 3D Max and MIBR. MIBR, by the way, I wish that team were better. I feel like they should be so much better. But then lose 2-0 to Astralis, not that compelling a game, and then lose to Pain as well. So I would have had them as actually a contender in a lot of ways, given that how far they made it in Dallas. I had them as a top team within the region, like the best team in the region probably. And Pain were certainly and have been certainly close. It's just one of those scenarios where I don't know that I don't know if I buy into Huaso Peak. I think he's the player that's more like the biggest enigma to me.
How can a player with a name like that not be
not be a demon? I just think he's so odd because I see some games he pops off and I mean literally just swings everything, kills everyone, and then I see these other games where he is just like the shyest guy alive, and I don't know who he is. Like what characterization do I have of this person? I know Max is gonna be a crazy bastard. I know DGT is also gonna just kill hella people mid to late round. I don't know what Huaso Peak does, but he kills people a lot of the time. Sometimes, but not always. I don't know. They're just a weird team. I think they're just weird, as much as they're fun to watch.
Yeah, we'll have to see what version of them we get at this event, because if we get the Firepower League 9Z, we're going to look really stupid. If we get the team that end up losing to Pain that looked a bit flat, we'll probably look, well, not like geniuses, but we'll look slightly more correct than we did in the other scenario. It's tough to judge, though, of course. As I said, coming into this play in the underdog picks, most of these teams fit within like 7 HLTV ranks, and if you're not, getting invites and you're just having to fight your way to those spots, it's going to be quite hard to separate these teams. So I don't think it's too unfair of us to have not picked them, despite maybe thinking they are very solid.
There's good underdogs. I actually think like the play-in actually has good arguments for quite a lot of the underdogs in that way. So that's, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it feels so clear-cut, like, oh, we're just picking the highest ranked underdogs because they actually play better teams all the time. But I think you've got like a good variety at this event, weirdly.
I think the fun, something kind of like a meta storyline is that this will be every event next year. Will be like,
yeah,
you'll come into it and you're like, there's so many storylines here. The problem with like a blast groups is you sit there and like, especially like when they're at their worst, like you sat there like, oh god, it's EG again. Like, oh no, oh we're gonna watch Nip play again with a stand-in. Oh, yeah, this is gonna be awful.
And G2's gonna lose to OG because they didn't practice the entire break.
I mean, even what is the worst team here probably is 9 Pandas. Even that, they're exciting. They could win some maps. They could definitely win a game. There's so many interesting storylines. It's like a sleeper, really fun event. I actually hope this continues into next year, this sort of thing, because it is when teams don't just appear by virtue and they have to qualify or whatever, or they have to, actually maintain a level of performance to get in. You're going to get more events like this.
Yeah. Hopefully a lot of fun. I've had one conversation with one coach behind the scenes in Tier 2 who thought these orgs, they're going to find a way. They're going to be, able to defend their investors' money, somehow find a way to scum us out of this truly open circuit. But I'm maintaining optimism. I do think we're going to see a lot of really, I think, just chaotic events like this one.
I mean, you're allowed to still run events where you just invite people randomly. They just can't be used for world ranking points. They just become unranked tournaments for like X amount of money. And I think you can only do like 250 a year or 250k a year. So you're still going to see events like this where like BetBoom Dacha, by the way, BetBoom team in the tournament. Like you'll still see tournaments like this probably that will eat into some of the players' calendars a little bit, but they'll be like much shorter events because they won't want to conflict with the world ranking points that then get you to majors, that get you the return on your investment, the largest with sticker money and all that.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and find out and hope for the best. Let's wrap it up there. I said I thought this would be a shorter event, shorter video.
Yeah.
It's end up being close to 2 hours. Actually, one of the longest we've ever recorded.
Oopsie.
Incredible. Lovely. All good stuff, though. All good stuff. Thank you again, Allan, for joining us. Great analysis, great insight, as always. If you're a viewer, long-time viewer, you know Yumi. I don't need to thank him every episode, do I? I don't think I ever have, so that's all good.
No,
right.
Yeah.
Leave a like if you enjoyed. Drop a comment telling us why we're wrong. Be sure to vote in the polls that have come out to let us know your picks. They won't matter because the guests are already chosen, but I might throw them out there just to gauge the community reaction, especially around those underdogs. Those are really hard to decipher. Remember, members get access to content early, as well as a bunch of other videos, including right now an interview with the coach and general manager of Revenant, which has just been released. So yeah, if you want to see that, please consider becoming a member, and we'll see you in the next one.